Hello, everyone, and welcome to MOS Live. My name is Sarah. My pronouns are she and hers, and I will be your moderator today for the Ask a Scientist All About Birds. If you are watching on Facebook, thank you so much for being there, but please know that we can't grab your questions and comments from there. If you are watching us on Zoom, you can press the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask a question about birds. If we end up asking your question and you would like a shout out, please leave your name and age. If you would like to see closed captioning, please press the CC button at the bottom of your screen and select Show Captions. So now I would like to have my educators come on and introduce themselves.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jonathan. I use he, him pronouns. And one of my favorite things about birds has to do with the kiwi, which is a small flightless bird in New Zealand, just about a foot long, but it produces one of the largest eggs of any bird. And in fact, that egg can take up just about a quarter of the female's body before it is expelled. So it's just one of those weird sorts of things. There are a lot of different fun facts about birds out there, and that's one of my favorite.
Hello everyone, my name is Marcus. My preferred pronouns are he, him, his. And my favorite bird fact concerns owls. Owls are fascinating birds to me, and one of those animal facts that's just fascinating is the fact that some owls have asymmetric ears, which means that they have one ear right around up here and the other ear is a little lower down here. And that's what helps them hunt at night. They don't rely just on their vision, but some owls can actually hunt in pitch black darkness without any sight or any light at all. And that's even the barn owl, a very common species of owl that you can find around Massachusetts.
Hi, my name is Megan, and my pronouns are she, her. And my favorite thing about birds is that they're everywhere. You can go out in the middle of New York City or in the middle of the forest in Vermont or really anywhere, and you can find birds. They're really easy to see and look at. So it's a really great way for anyone to connect with nature wherever you are. And that is my favorite thing about birds.
Well, thank you all so much. Our first question is from Clement, age 9, which is how many types of birds are there? And maybe also we can just do a quick overview of what a bird is.
Yeah, there are a lot of different kinds of birds. And there are some features that define what exactly a bird is, certain like anatomical features like fused bones and things like that. But one of the biggest, most obvious things that makes a bird is feathers. Which came from dinosaurs. It's completely 100% correct to say that birds are dinosaurs. But there was another part of that question, how many birds are there? So scientists estimate that there's about 10,000 or so species of birds. Depending on who you ask, it could be possibly more, maybe up to like 18,000, but typically what you'll hear is there's around 10,000 different species of birds, so a lot. And here in the United States, we have somewhere around maybe like 1,000 species of birds. If you're looking at like one particular state, we're in Boston, Massachusetts, there's right around like 400 or 500 species of birds there.
Great. So a little bit more about birds. This question is, I think birds are reptiles. If so, why are they warm-blooded instead of cold-blooded?
So
That's a great. Go for it, Marcus. Yeah.
Sure. So I only caught part of that question because my internet kind of blanked out there. But technically speaking, some scientists do categorize birds under reptiles, and many reptiles are cold-blooded. In fact, most are, but birds are warm-blooded. All birds are warm-blooded, which means they generate their own body heat. And that's what allows them to be found all over the world. They are found on all 7 continents, even Antarctica, where you find the famous emperor penguins. But there are some birds, although they are considered warm-blooded or what we call endothermic, they generate their own body heat. Some birds, they kind of change temperature. Their body temperature does not stay constant all the time. An example would be hummingbirds. Hummingbirds are constantly moving around. They use a lot of energy. They need high sugar diets like nectar to keep them active. and they don't always eat. At night, they need to sleep. And so what they'll do is their body actually goes in a state of what's called torpor, which essentially means their heartbeat drops, their metabolic rate drops, which means they use a lot less energy. And that's what helps them conserve energy and stay alive through the night. And in that time, because their body is not burning energy, their body temperature drops drastically, far below their normal during the day. And so while they technically are warm-blooded animals, their body temperature does fluctuate throughout even just one day. Excellent question. I'm not sure if there was another part to that question that I missed.
Yeah, and I think I'd just add that the reason why they can still technically be considered reptiles by some scientists but are warm-blooded has to do with sort of their unique evolutionary history. In some ways, humans could theoretically be lumped in the same group because we sort of emerged from the same lineage at some point where as animals were evolving on Earth. So just at some point that adaptation of warm-bloodedness sort of came along in the lineage that would become birds, and it became very successful. It allowed them to populate different niches and become the 10,000 species that Megan mentioned.
All
yeah,
right.
these dinosaurs are a subset of reptiles, right? And birds are a subset of dinosaurs, so they definitely fit in that clade.
Yes, well, thank you, Megan. That's what I was going to ask next. What is the bird which is closely related to a dinosaur?
Oh, so Jonathan and Marcus, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's a chicken. I'm pretty sure it's a chicken, which is, I don't know why, but I just find that hysterical. And I have no idea why it's so funny, but maybe it's because it's unexpected. But yeah, chickens, and I think relatives of chickens have like the closest, are most, what people think are most closely related to dinosaurs.
All right, Zachary, age 7, asks, are there any birds that don't lay eggs?
That's a good question, and I think the answer is no. One of the wonderful rules in biology is that there's an exception to every rule, but I believe that is one of the defining characteristics of being a bird, being warm-blooded, having feathers, and laying eggs. Although there might be an exception out there. I'm not 100% sure on that.
There's not. All birds lay eggs, yeah.
All right, a lot of people have asked, what is the largest bird?
Ooh, I'll take this one. And it kind of depends on what you mean by largest. Typically, when we think of a bird, we think of something that flies, this flighted animal. And so if we're going by that definition, the largest bird, the one that has the longest wingspan, would be the wandering albatross. And it's essentially a very long-winged bird that kind of looks like a large seagull that you find along coastlines and spends hours, if not sometimes days, just gliding above the waves of the ocean. And that really long wingspan of about 12 feet long, about twice the size of a normal person or a taller person, those animals, they just have this enormous wingspan that helps them glide nearly endlessly and flap just every few minutes. But the largest bird in terms of weight would be the ostrich, a bird that can't fly at all. The ostrich is about 9 feet tall at the tallest and weighs over 300 pounds. That's heavier than most people and by far taller than most people as well. And that bird can actually move very, very quickly. So its size is something that helps it survive in the wild.
Yeah, and I would just add to that another factor to consider is evolutionary time, because there have been even larger birds in the past. For instance, the moa in New Zealand, which stood over 10 feet tall before it was hunted into extinction.
All right, so I have 2 questions based on what you both said. The first one might be fast. Clement, age 9, asks, how fast can an ostrich run?
Very quickly, they can run about 40 miles per hour. That's about as fast as a horse in short distances, and ostriches can maintain that speed for a little bit.
Great, and then going off what Jonathan said, we've gotten questions are there any birds that are extinct?
Oh,
Yeah.
there are lots of birds that are extinct. Going back, 150 million years ago to when we had the earliest birds, or the earliest birds that we know of, like Archaeopteryx, that famous fossil that has feathers and people think was one of the earliest birds. So those birds that overlapped with dinosaurs have gone extinct. And then there are birds, more modern birds that have gone extinct too, some that have overlapped with people, some that have gone extinct pretty recently. There's famous examples like the dodo bird that went extinct, the elephant bird, which I think might have been the largest bird that ever lived. And then birds that have gone extinct more recently in the last 150 years are, one really famous example is the passenger pigeon, which is one of the birds that kind of sparked the conservation movement in terms of birds. There were probably over 1 billion of these birds that lived in North America, and they ended up going extinct. And even more recently than that, there's a bird called the ivory-billed woodpecker that I think the last known ivory-billed woodpecker, like the last definite one that people saw was maybe in like the 1920s, maybe later than that in Cuba. But so yeah, unfortunately, there are a lot of birds that have gone extinct, and there's a lot that we can do to keep protecting the birds that are here now. So if anyone has questions about that, we'd love to talk about that too.
Yeah, I think it's important to add to that birds are often considered indicator species, which is when scientists refer to indicator species, what they're referring to is a species which lets us know that there is something wrong ecologically in an environment. And they often are some of the first creatures to go extinct in a particular habitat, or the first that we notice. And Megan mentioned some great examples where human intervention is what drove them extinct. So the passenger pigeon, we hunted to extinction. The dodo, humans hunted to extinction. And you very quickly realize that because they're very loud, they're squawking, they're flying. And so it's very obvious when those sorts of organisms begin to disappear from an environment, and it tells us that we need to change our behavior. So in that way, we can use birds as sort of a signal to help us know that we need to intervene and help protect various natural resources.
Great. So Clement, age 9, Prisha, age 8, and Faith, age 9, all ask, what is the smallest bird?
So I can grab that one. The smallest bird would be the bee hummingbird. And the bee hummingbird is about 2.5 inches long. It's about that big. They're very, very small, and they weigh less than 1/10 of an ounce. So you wouldn't even feel this small hummingbird land on you. They are so small. But despite their small size, they are really important species because they're pollinators. A lot of birds eat nectar, and when they get that nectar from a flower, they're covered with pollen, and then they bring it to another flower, and then they help that flower reproduce. And they're really important to their ecosystem. They're just super duper tiny.
Great. So I think this is a unique question. The question is a bat a bird? They don't think so, but maybe we can talk about bats and birds.
Well, that's a cool question. And no, bats are not birds; they're mammals. But so you're absolutely right about that. But they obviously have similarities, right? Bats can fly too. I don't know much about bats, but but they are not birds. Birds are definitely descendants of dinosaurs, a subset of reptiles, and bats are mammals. I don't know if they're, I honestly know nothing about them. They're related to mice. Are they rodents?
Yeah, I don't know that much about bats, but I would say this is a great example of why flight is considered such a great evolutionary advantage, why there are so many birds in the world, because flight allows you to escape, and they are not alone in having developed that sort of thing. So we see flight across all animal species, right? We see it in insects, we see it in mammals with bats, we see it in birds, we even see it to some extent in fish, right? Because it allows those organisms to survive really, really well in their particular habitats. So yeah, across multiple different groups, we see examples of flight. Not everything that flies is a bird, but everything that has feathers is a bird.
So speaking of feathers, we've had a lot of questions about feathers. For example, how many feathers does a bird have, or what exactly are feathers? So maybe we could talk about feathers a little bit.
Sure, that's it.
Go
Get
ahead,
started,
Jonathan.
Marcus. No, okay, all right. I'll get started with it because I can only touch on it a little bit here. But so it depends on what feathers you're talking about, because birds actually have multiple different types of feathers, and there are sort of two large groups that they break up into that are sort of the veined feathers, which are like the flight feathers, the feathers they use to attract mates, things of that nature, their coloration, and then there are down feathers, which just serve the purpose of keeping the bird warm. So those feathers typically exist underneath the veined feathers. So there are but even within those two groups, I think there's a total of like 16 different types of feathers. Some are sensory nerve essential feathers that allow them to sense their environment. So lots of different purposes behind those feathers.
Yeah, and as far as what they're made of, a lot of them have a keratin sheath, and keratin is the same material as our hair and our fingernails. So it's a natural occurring protein in a lot of animals, from reptiles to mammals to birds, and birds have used keratin to partly develop their feathers. And like Jonathan was saying, those feathers can have a lot of different functions.
Yeah, I think part of that question might have been about how many feathers birds have. Which, yeah, they have all different types of feathers, even some feathers that I'm forgetting what they're called. I think they're actually called powder down feathers that don't even stay feathers. Some birds grow them and then they like disintegrate into a powder that birds use to put on their feathers that might help like waterproof them. So yeah, a whole bunch of different types of feathers, but the number of feathers that a bird has depends usually on the size of the bird. Typically, the rule is the bigger the bird, the more feathers it's going to have. So like something like a smaller bird may have around like, I don't know exactly, maybe 1,000 feathers. But something big like a swan could have, like 25,000 feathers. And a lot of them are just like contour down feathers that are just on their neck alone. But I think, and this is the only thing that I know about penguins, is I think they maybe have close to like the most feathers of birds. They have like 80,000 or like 100,000 feathers or something. Their feathers are really tiny and I think very close together to help them stay warm. So there's a huge variability in the number of feathers that birds have, and it depends on the type of bird and the size of the bird.
And just to work off of that, a quick fact that I remember learning when I was really young is that especially for flighted birds, birds that can fly, for example, let's take an owl, the weight of their feathers is greater than the weight of their bones. And so birds have a lot of feathers, and it also tells you that bird bones are very light. So that was just a quick fact that really stuck with me when I was younger.
So Clement, age 9, asked, why do birds have beak and not teeth?
I will just continue my train of thought. So I mentioned that birds have really light bones, and that's partly what helps the birds that do fly. Having light bones makes it easier to get up off the ground, but birds also have a lot of other adaptations that help them fly. One of them is the hollow bones, their feathers, of course. The fact that a lot of their weight is towards the center of their body. That's why you don't really see birds with huge muscular arms or a lot of weight on their ends, because it's really easy to control the weight that you pick up or when you fly when it's all in one area. And teeth are really hard bone. And so if you have hard, heavy teeth at the end of your mouth, that will make flying quite difficult. So instead they have this beak that tends to be very slender, very sharp, and very durable without all of that weight that teeth give you. And so birds have beaks because it's one of those adaptations that helps them fly. But what's very interesting is to look at the shape of that beak. It can give you a lot of information on the diet or the habits of birds based on the shape of their beak.
Okay, so we have a question about a couple different questions. One is, oh, I lost it. It's about a parrot. How can parrots repeat words? And then someone else was asking about, can they understand humans?
So I can start with that one as well. So what helps us talk are our vocal cords. In our larynx, there are vocal folds that air passes through, and when they pass through a certain way, it makes noise. Birds, on the other hand, they have a syrinx, which is kind of like what we have, but slightly modified. And they don't just have one pair of vocal folds, they have two. And so birds are able to make essentially two different sounds at once. And when it comes to parrots, they're very, very, very good at mimicking noises. They can mimic a lot of noises, including human speech. So when you see videos or if you hear a parrot talking, what's generally happening is that they're not really understanding what they're saying, but rather they're repeating a noise very, very well over and over because it gives a reaction that they find favorable. And it gets positive attention, so they're more encouraged to repeat it. But there have been a very select few number of parrots that have shown the capacity to understand and respond in the human language, in English. Alex, the gray parrot, was a parrot that was raised by a person in captivity for many, many years. And this person taught this parrot how to count, taught different colors, taught them different objects. They could identify shapes by themselves. And Alex, this gray parrot, was capable of forming speech, putting together words to say things that weren't necessarily said to it. So that's one example of a parrot actually understanding speech. But the vast majority of times when a bird says a human word or a word in English, Spanish, any language, they don't know what they're saying. They're just mimicking a noise that they've heard before. I'm not sure if either of you two want to add something.
No,
Yeah,
oh, go ahead. Sorry, Jonathan.
Well, yeah, I was just going to add that it's often really difficult to determine, especially when it comes to something like emotion, whether a bird is experiencing that in the same way that a human might. And it's difficult for us to not sort of assign human characteristics to the bird when that's really not what's going on. Birds are extraordinarily intelligent, and some of them are even more so than other birds. So crows and ravens in particular can solve incredibly complex puzzles and things of that nature. They've been shown to recognize particular human beings and even can recognize particular emotional states because it might benefit them in terms of whether they're going to get food or get whacked or not, right? But whether they actually understand what that means is a much more difficult question to answer.
Yeah, I was going to chime in with just a fun fact about those African gray parrots that Marcus was talking about that just came out recently. It was in the news. I believe it's the same woman, the same scientist that worked with the parrot Alex is working with another gray parrot now who was part of a study where this parrot was able to perform better than some Harvard graduate students on a memory test. It broke down after a certain, after it got really complicated, but there was a certain point where this parrot was actually better at this thought test than graduate students, which was pretty remarkable.
I guess bird brain is not an insult then.
No, it's not. And that's, yeah, that's what's interesting. Yeah, they have small brains, but they can have a lot of neurons packed in there. So the size, it's not always size that matters.
All right, so I think this is going to be our last set of questions. We have a lot of questions about birds here in Massachusetts and on the East Coast. So the first one is from Crosby, age 6. Are ravens native to Massachusetts? And then someone asks, what are the rare birds we can see in the East Coast?
I really don't know what the rarest bird on the East Coast is. I wish I did. I do know that you can see ravens in New England. They're more common in certain places than others, but it's not completely unusual to see a raven in Massachusetts, although it's rare. It's more likely you'll see American crows or fish crows around. But you can, it's possible you'll see a raven. I think, was there more to that question?
I'd just like to encourage viewers, if you'd like to know what birds you can find here, go out and look for yourself. Bird watching is an excellent hobby and it's a lot of fun. It can be a little hard to get started at first, especially when it comes to identifying birds, but what Megan said earlier, it's incredibly, am I frozen? Okay, never mind, I thought I was frozen. It's something that you can do anywhere. Birds are found all over the place. And so you can essentially birdwatch anywhere, and getting attuned or learning about your local birds will help you identify them even easier. And when you travel, go to other states, other cities, you'll start to notice how bird populations are different everywhere. And it's a fascinating hobby. I'd recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, I was just going to bounce off of that a little bit. That I don't know necessarily the most rare species in Massachusetts, but just the other day I saw an oriole for the first time in 3 years, and it was so exciting for exactly the reasons that Marcus was just saying. That it just sort of caught my eye, and I had to be like, wait, what is that really super orange bird? And really had to like rake my brain for what it could have possibly been. I got to go and like search through the internet to try and figure out what it was. And then it ended up nesting in the area. So now I can follow along with it. And it's been super satisfying to get to know that bird a little.
Yeah. And if you're, interested in bird conservation, even though none of us seems to know what the rarest bird is, in the Northeast, pretty much all birds are threatened in some way or another right now. There was a study that came out recently that showed that in the last, I think it was 50 years, we've lost about 3 billion birds. So like 1 in 4 birds we've lost since like the 70s or something like that. So, and this is for a whole bunch of different reasons that birds are threatened, things like climate change, urbanization, so cities sprawling out, habitat destruction, cats, birds, window strikes. There are all these different things that threaten birds, and there are so many things that you can do to help. And one of those things, like Jonathan and Marcus was saying, is to start watching birds. And if you start to get pretty good at identifying birds, you can actually help scientists by collecting data through things like eBird or Christmas bird counts. And this data is actually used by scientists. And this is something that I did when I was a scientist. I used eBird data to study birds. And it's actually really, really helpful. So you can become a citizen scientist and help scientists study birds. And that's a great way to help with conservation efforts.
All right, well, I think that's a great place to end. I love citizen science, and now that I've been home, I've been watching a lot of birds as well, especially in importing them to iNaturalist, which is another citizen science project. So thank you all so much. I'm going to have you guys wave goodbye.
Thanks for coming.
Bye, thank you.
And thank you everyone for being amazing scientists today. We had a lot of questions that were unanswered, but hopefully you can log into one of these next time and we'll be able to answer your question. So if you would like to know more about our virtual offerings, you can head to www.mos.org/mos@home to learn more about what else we are offering. And if you would like to support the museum, if you like today's program, please head to engage.mos.org/welcome. So thank you all so much. Have a fabulous, what time is it? Afternoon, and have a good day. Thank you all.